Hey, faithful listeners, welcome to the first episode of Season 8 of the Bible Explained podcast. I'm so glad you guys are back on the podcast with me after taking a week off. It was a very nice week that I was able to take off. I spent a little bit of time with my sister, but as you can see, the podcast got a little bit of a facelift. There's a new song that you can thank my husband for. He wrote that nice little guitar riff at the very beginning. And at the end of the podcast, you'll be able to hear the full song, which I think sounds great. My husband did a great job with it. And then I added the violins and bass part to the song, and I think it turned out very well. So that is a Jen and Garrett original that you're hearing on the podcast. And then also the podcast got a new thumbnail picture. So that is different as well. So as you guys know, the podcast is now going to be doing the Old Testament on Mondays and Wednesdays and the New Testament on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then for the members over on Ko-fi, there will be a Psalm episode on Friday. So if you would like to gain access to the Psalms episodes on Fridays, check out the link in Ko-fi and sign up for the coffee tier on Ko-fi. All right, let's read 1 Kings 1, verses 1 all the way to 31. We're going to be talking about David about to die and the new person, Solomon, who is going to reign on the throne after David dies. So I'll be reading this out of the WEB as I always do. And for those of you who are just tuning in to the podcast for the first time, I read out of the WEB version because it is a public domain version of scripture. You'll be shocked to know that most versions of the scripture are copyrighted. And so I'm not really allowed to read them in their entirety on a podcast like this, which is unfortunate, but the WEB is not copyrighted, and so that is why I use it. But you guys can grab whatever version of the Bible that you prefer to read out of. And I'll go ahead and read 1 Kings 1, 1 through 31 today. Now King David was old and advanced in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he couldn't keep warm. Therefore his servant said to him, "Let a young virgin be sought for my lord the king. Let her stand before the king and cherish him, and let her lie in your bosom, that my lord the king may keep warm." So they sought for a beautiful young lady throughout all the borders of Israel and found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The young lady was very beautiful, and she cherished the king and served him, but the king didn't know her intimately. Then Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, "I will be the king." Then he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. His father had not displeased him at any time in saying, "Why have you done so?" And he was also a very handsome man. And he was born after Absalom. He conferred with Joab the son of Zeruiah and with Abiathar the priest, and they followed Adonijah and helped him. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and the mighty men who belonged to David were not with Adonijah. Adonijah killed sheep, cattle, and fatlings by the stone of Zeheleth, which is beside En-Rogel. And he called all of his brothers, the king's sons, and all the men of Judah, the king's servants. But he didn't call Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, and the mighty men, and Solomon his brother. Then Nathan spoke to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, "Haven't you heard that Adonijah the son of Haggith reigns, and David our Lord doesn't know it? Now therefore come, please let me give you counsel, that you may save your own life, and your son Solomon's life. Go into King David and tell him, 'Didn't you, my lord king, swear to your servant, saying, Assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then does Adonijah reign? Behold, while you are still talking there with the king, I will also come in after you and confirm your words.' Bathsheba went into the king's room. The king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite was serving the king. Bathsheba bowed and showed respect to the king. The king said, 'What would you like?' She said to him, 'My lord, you swore by Yahweh your God to your servant, Assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. Now behold, Adonijah reigns, and you, my lord the king, don't know it. He has slain cattle and fatlings and sheep in abundance, and has called all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the captain of the army, but he hasn't called Solomon your servant. You, my lord the king, the eyes of all of Israel are on you, that you should tell them who will sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise it will happen, when my lord the king sleeps with his fathers, that I and my son Solomon will be considered criminals.' Behold, while she was still talking with the king, Nathan the prophet came in. They told the king, saying, "Behold, Nathan the prophet." When he had come in before the king, he bowed himself before the king with his face to the ground. Nathan said, "My lord king, have you said, Adonijah shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne? For he has gone down today, and he has slain cattle, fatlings, and sheep in abundance. And he has called all the king's sons, and the captains of the army, and Abiathar the priest. Behold, they are eating and drinking before him, and saying, Long live King Adonijah. But he hasn't called me, even me your servant, Zadok the priest, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon. Was this thing done by my lord the king, and you haven't shown to your servants who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him?" Then King David answered, "Call Bathsheba into me." She came into the king's presence and stood before the king. The king swore and said, "As Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity, most certainly as I swore to you by Yahweh, the God of Israel, saying, Assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. I will most certainly do this today." Then Bathsheba bowed her face to the earth and showed respect to the king and said, "Let my lord, King David, live forever." So now David is very old. And by very old, he's about 70 years old. And he has really gone downhill in the past few years. As you can see from the end of 2 Samuel into 1 Kings, David was still kind of going out to battle. He was still kind of fighting wars or trying to. But towards the end of 2 Samuel, actually, he was just becoming more and more decrepit to the point where he couldn't really defend himself anymore, and he actually almost got killed in battle. So then after that, he didn't end up going out to battle anymore. Now, 70 years old is not really that old, but think about the life David led. His first years were him fleeing from Saul, and he was a fugitive for so long. He was hiding out in caves and running all over Israel, trying to get away from Saul, eventually going into Philistine territory, and then eventually going back to Israel and becoming kind of the quasi-king. He was the king of Judah for a long time, just one tribe, the tribe of Judah. But then finally, all of Israel made David their king. So then he became the king. And at that point, he reigned for about 40 years. So since he became the king at about 30, he would have been around 70 years old when he stopped reigning, when he died. He just had a very hard life, just between all of the battles that he went through, all of the trouble in his life, and then not to mention that sin that he did with Bathsheba, who is mentioned here, what we read today. I mean, that also took a toll on his life as well, because that was what caused all of the trouble in his family. So after he sinned with Bathsheba by sleeping with her when she was not his wife, and also she was married to another man, 3 children died because of that sin. And one of his children, Absalom specifically, tried to kill King David. So he became a fugitive all over again in the latter part of his life. So he's had a really rough life. And so that is why at 70 years old, they covered him with clothes, but he couldn't keep warm. So David was just old and he was frail at this point. And basically the only thing he could do was lie in bed. And he knew that he was close to dying. He knew that. So they put all the blankets on him. They put all the clothes on him that they could, and he still couldn't keep warm. So his servants come up with this very bad idea. They say, "Let a young virgin be sought for my lord the king. Let her stand before the king and cherish him, and let her lie in your bosom that my lord the king may keep warm." So this means that they wanted to find a young concubine for David to act as David's nurse, okay, and to lie with him and keep him warm. Now, something that was very disappointing was that I read 2 commentaries before beginning today's episode. And both of those commentaries said that there was nothing wrong with this. One of those commentaries was Enduring Word, written by David Guzik, which I've had David Guzik on the podcast before, and I actually really like him. I like him, but man, I could not disagree with him more on this particular issue. David Guzik actually said that it was proper of David to allow this, and it did not bring a moral cloud over the last days of David's life. He says it was proper because it was a recognized medical treatment in the ancient world. It was proper because David almost certainly made this young woman his concubine, but he didn't sleep with her. and therefore they chose someone eligible for marriage or a concubine. I don't know what that has to do with being proper, because why did it have to be a concubine? Why couldn't it have been one of David's wives? He had multiple wives. He also had multiple concubines, as we already know. Why couldn't it have been one of his previous concubines? And you might be like, well, it's because this woman was a nurse. But why did she have to be a concubine? Why couldn't she just come and minister to David, and one of David's wives, if he was cold, come and sleep with him? Why did it have to be a young, attractive, sexy girl? Because that's what it says they found. It says they sought for a beautiful young lady throughout all the borders of Israel and found Abishag the Shumanite and brought her to the king. The young lady was very beautiful, and she cherished the king and served him, but the king didn't know her intimately. So people say, well, because David didn't actually sleep with this woman, it's fine. It's totally fine. But here's the thing. Those of you who are married, would you be okay if your spouse got a nurse and slept with that nurse to keep warm? Even if your spouse wasn't doing anything with that nurse, but they were both canoodling in bed, okay, because we know, based upon the fact that this was an ancient thing, this woman was naked, okay, we know that. Would you be okay with a naked nurse in your spouse's bed, even if they were doing absolutely nothing? No, you would not be okay with that, because there's something innately wrong with this. God designed the marriage model to be a man and a woman, not a man and a woman plus. Even if you're not having intimate sexual relations with that other person, God did not design marriage to be like that. He designed it to be between a woman and a man. That's it. David got a new concubine in the last days of his life. And think about just how terrible this would have been for this young woman as well. It says, yes, she cherished him, but that could also mean that she just took good care of him, not necessarily that she loved him. But think about also the ramifications for this young woman. Because she is now the king's concubine, she is never, ever going to be able to have children with anybody else. She is never going to be able to get married to anybody else. She is going to be basically a widow. This young woman is going to be a widow forever. That would be the ramifications of this. So not only did David sin by taking this concubine to keep him warm, to canoodle him in bed, but he also sinned by ruining this young girl's life, because she would never be able to have that intimate, wonderful relationship between a male and a female that God designed at the very beginning. So this was a sin. By all accounts, David already had women. David already had wives that could keep him warm. I mean, Bathsheba is mentioned right here. She could have done the job. David could have gotten a platonic male or female nurse to take care of him all the rest of the time. He didn't need a young woman to keep him warm in bed. He did not need it. But anyway, this young woman was named Abishag, and she is going to come up again in the next chapter, I believe. So she's not just mentioned here. She's mentioned a few times. But anyway, after David ends up getting a new concubine at the end of his life, it says that Adonijah, who was the fourth son of David, the fourth oldest of David, it says he exalted himself and he said, I will be the king. So he prepared himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. Who does this sound like? If you guys followed along with me in 2 Samuel, you'll see that Absalom did the exact same thing. Literally to the T. He got these chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. So he made this big show, whenever he would go through Israel on the streets. Oh, look, Adonijah is coming. Look at all of these men running before him with flags or whatever. And look at all of these chariots and horsemen and everything that are surrounding him. So he made this big show out of it to give himself all of this glory. And he decided that he was going to be the next king. But here's what it says in verse 6. This is very interesting. It says, his father had not displeased him at any time by saying, why have you done so? And he was also a very handsome man, and he was born after Absalom. So there's a few things going on here with Adonijah. The first being was that he was never disciplined. David never asked Adonijah at any point in time, Why are you doing that? You shouldn't do that. David never once disciplined Adonijah. It says he was never displeased by David. Discipline is never fun. I remember being very displeased at my parents when I was growing up because they disciplined me, but ultimately that discipline was very good for me. But Adonijah didn't have that. He didn't have a father who ever disciplined him. And on top of this, he was very handsome. He was like Absalom in that way. He was extremely, strikingly handsome. And so he was vain on top of never being disciplined. So he was becoming very entitled, and he decided that he was going to be the next king, even though God had not chosen him as the next king. The nation of Israel was not supposed to be like the other nations. The other nations, whoever was next in line for the throne would be the king, right? That is just how it worked. But with the nation of Israel, that was not how it's supposed to work. God was supposed to choose the king every single time. Because if you go back to the Old Testament law, when God talks about the kings, he mentions, whoever is the king is somebody that I am going to choose. So just because Adonijah was next in line for the throne, he believed that that was what qualified him for being the next king. On top of the fact that he was entitled and he wanted it, but he didn't care if God chose him or not. He was looking at the nations around him and said, oh, that's what all the other nations do, is whoever is next in line for the throne gets it. So that's me. I get it. But that is not what God was choosing. God had chosen Solomon. And there's no verse that says this in the Bible, but 1 Chronicles 22, if you read the entire chapter, talks about God telling David that Solomon was going to be the king that built the temple to him. Let me read a little bit of this. So this is 1 Chronicles 22. This is out of the NIV version. And it says in verse 5, David said, my son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence and fame and splendor in the sight of all the nations. Therefore, I will make preparations for it. So David made extensive preparations before his death. Then he called for his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for the Lord, the God of Israel. David said to Solomon, my son, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, but this word of the Lord came to me. You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name, because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all of his enemies on every side. And his name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign. He is the one who will build a house for my name. He will be my son, and I will be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. So it sounds like David had gotten at some point in time a prophecy from God that Solomon was going to be the next king. And so that is why David told Solomon that he was going to be the next king. And David had promised Bathsheba, his wife, and the mother of Solomon, that Solomon would be the next king, because God had chosen Solomon. But Adonijah didn't care about this. And Adonijah clearly knew also that Solomon was next in line for the throne, possibly because David had already talked about this. David was already beginning to make preparations for it, as we can see with the materials that David accrued before his death, intending for Solomon to use them in order to build the temple to God. So it's very likely that David's entire family knew that Solomon was next in line for the throne and that God had chosen Solomon. But Adonijah didn't care about any of this, and he ended up gaining some supporters to help give him the throne, basically. It says that he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest. And they followed Adonijah and helped him. So Joab, the wild card of everything, ends up trying to help Adonijah. We don't know why. Maybe it was because Joab thought this would be the best for Israel. Maybe it was because Joab was angry at David for taking his position as commander of the army away from him at one point. We don't know why Joab decided to follow Adonijah or support Adonijah, but he ended up doing it. And also Abiathar, it says, Abiathar the priest. Now, Abiathar was a loyal supporter of David for a very long time. He was one of the priests, in fact, the only priest that escaped Saul so many years ago. And he had helped David multiple times after that. So Abiathar, it's kind of surprising that he decided to follow Adonijah and help Adonijah. But there was multiple other people that did not support Adonijah and supported Solomon. It says Zadok the priest, who we've heard his name before, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. Now Benaiah was one of David's 30 mighty men. We talked about the 30 mighty men a couple weeks ago at the end of 2 Samuel. Benaiah was one of them. I think he became the captain of the guard or something. And then Nathan the prophet, we know Nathan. Shimei and Ray, we don't know who these guys are. And also the mighty men who belonged to David. So the 30 mighty men, other than Joab. Actually, Joab wasn't considered one of the 30 mighty men. Funny enough. But the 30 mighty men that David had did not support Adonijah. It says they were not with him. However, Adonijah, with the support that he did have, he thought it would be enough. So he starts killing sheep and cattle and fatlings to make this big party and to crown himself as king. But it says that he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, the mighty men, or Solomon to this big feast, but he invited all of his other brothers. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Adonijah knew that Solomon was supposed to be on the throne, because he did not invite Solomon specifically, but he invited all of his other siblings to this big party. So now Nathan gets really concerned, okay? And he's like, we need to fix this, because now Solomon's life is in danger, and so is Bathsheba's life. Adonijah is going to be like Absalom and try to kill everybody who stands in his way. So Nathan goes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she says, haven't you heard that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, reigns, and David, our Lord, doesn't know it? So he kind of like scolds Bathsheba here. He scolds her. Why haven't you done anything about this? You're the mother of the next king, and yet you're sitting there doing nothing. Why are you doing nothing? He says, you heard about all of this. We got to do something about it. You're going to die if we don't do something about it. He says, therefore come, let me give you counsel that you can save your own life and your son Solomon's life. He says, go into King David and tell him this. And so Nathan gives the words to Bathsheba as to what to say to David. And so Bathsheba does it. It says that she goes into the king's room. It says the king was very old in verse 15, and Abishag the Shunammite was serving the king. So that's really awkward that Bathsheba goes into like a naked woman in David's bed, most likely. Or maybe she wasn't naked. Maybe she was serving him food or something. Who knows? Still awkward. But Bathsheba bows down and shows respect to the king. And this shows that, it's very unfortunate that David had this kind of relationship with his wives where they weren't his partner, like Bathsheba was not David's partner. She had to bow herself down before the king and show him respect, which isn't wrong in and of itself, but you can just see that Bathsheba was much more subservient to David than what a wife and a husband relationship should be. But the king says to her, what would you like? Now, I think because of what happened between David and Bathsheba, David was probably very more loyal to Bathsheba, I would say, than his other wives, because Bathsheba is really the only wife that's mentioned multiple times. And on top of that, Bathsheba was going to be the mother of the next king. So I do think that David gave Bathsheba a little bit more loyalty than he did to some of his other wives and concubines. And maybe that's why Bathsheba was able to just have an audience with the king whenever she needed to. And he was willing to allow that to happen. So he says, what would you like? She says to him, my lord, you swore by Yahweh your God to your servant, assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne. Then she says, but Adonijah is now reigning, and you, O King David, don't know about it. He has slain cattle and fatlings and sheep in abundance. He has called all the sons of the king, Abiathar the priest, and Joab, but he hasn't called Solomon your servant. So she tells King David just the situation as to what is happening, that she and Solomon are now considered criminals because Adonijah has crowned himself the king. She says, you, my lord the king, the eyes of all of Israel are on you. You need to tell them who is going to sit on the throne after you die. Otherwise, when you die, I and my son Solomon will be considered criminals. So she says, I am going to die. When you die, I die, and so does Solomon. So you have to tell Israel who is going to be the next king. And this also shows that, David really lost, I think, a lot of control of Israel because he doesn't really know what's going on. He didn't even know that Adonijah was doing this. And you'd think that the king would be the first to know when something like this happens. But Nathan, right after Bathsheba goes in, he comes in a few minutes later and also confirms Bathsheba's story. It says, "Behold, while she was still talking with the king, Nathan the prophet came in, and they told the king, saying, 'Behold, Nathan the prophet's here.' So David lets Nathan in, which shows a little bit more of David's personality, actually, because Nathan, the last time we saw him really was when Nathan came and confronted David about Bathsheba when they first committed that sin together. And David still had a good relationship with Nathan and didn't just like cut Nathan out of his life because he was offended or something like that. So it says Nathan comes in and confirms Bathsheba's story. And so now David fully understands exactly what is happening. So he calls Bathsheba back in to the room, and it says that she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king swore to her. He said, "As Yahweh lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity, most certainly as I swore to you by Yahweh, the God of Israel, saying, assuredly Solomon your son shall reign after me, and shall sit on my throne in my place, I will most certainly do this today." So David finally understands the gravity of the situation, that Adonijah has become the next Absalom and is about to stage a coup and kill Solomon and Bathsheba and whoever else stands in his way. David has heard this story before, and so now he realizes that he needs to take action. So he promises Bathsheba, he says, "Solomon will be the next king starting today. I will do this today." So Bathsheba, in respect of King David, it says she bowed her face down to the earth, and she showed respect to the king, and she said, "Let my lord King David live forever." Which is kind of ironic because David was on his deathbed, and I think David knew that he was on his deathbed, and so this very common greeting, "Long live the king," or "Forever live the king," I'm sure David was kind of like, all right, whatever. But anyway, faithful listeners, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Season 8. First Kings is starting out very interesting. I think it's going to be a great book to talk about. Second Kings is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. I love Second Kings. It's one of my favorites. Next to Judges. I really like Judges and I like Second Kings. And they both kind of follow a similar sort of path. That when people abandon God, things just go haywire. And that's why I love the books of Judges and also Second Kings. But faithful listeners, if you liked today's podcast, consider going over to Apple Podcasts and rating and writing a review of the podcast. That'd be very helpful to get the word out to more people. But faithful listeners, have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Hope it's nice and relaxing for you, as today is Labor Day. But I'll see you tomorrow, 6 a.m. or whenever you choose to wake up for an episode out of 1 Corinthians. Happy listening, and God bless.